In this teaching module, we're looking at the loanable funds market with an application to the regulation of payday loans. So here's our loanable funds market where borrowers and savers exchange time preferences. What emerges without any intervention is an optimal amount. We're looking at the payday loan market particularly. So in this payday loan market, loanable funds market, you arrive with an optimal amount of borrowers, people who need a loan in order to pay their bills, to pay their phone bill, to pay their rent, to pay their electricity. And what emerges is an optimal price and an optimal quantity. So now everybody who saves is able to earn interest. Everybody who wants to borrow in the payday loan market in order to cover their expenses is able to do so. Society's welfare is maximized. So you would ask why there would be intervention into the loanable funds market for payday loans. Well, what I learned recently, Mario Rizzo at NYU, I know him because he has a weekly seminar, a market process seminar. So I've known Mario for quite some time, but he's had a recent article critiquing regulation in Reason magazine. Mario Rizzo has a very good article in the recent issue of Reason magazine. And he says that the state has an action bias. The state has to be seen as doing something, right? Time preferences for elections are 2, 4, or 6 years, so the state has to constantly be in your consciousness, and they do that through action, through intervention. Mario Rizzo calls that an action bias. And De Gissé, it's one of my favorite books, De Gissé describes how the states, for existential reasons, to maintain its existence, it needs to grow its discretionary power. So with that as a theoretical background, why would the state intervene into the payday loan market if those who need funds are able to do so and those who save are able to earn interest? Well, and then we know from Hayek 1945 that when the state intervenes, you get social crisis. So this is an example of that using the loanable funds market. So when you're looking at the state action bias, then the state, are the state politicians, are they do-gooders promising to solve society's problems? Or are they demagogues? They know that the intervention causes social crisis, but they do it anyway, right? Are they hypocrites or demagogues? Do-gooders or hypocrites? So when the state intervenes, then you get intended or unintended consequences. So let's look at the intervention into the loanable funds market, payday loans. So what happens when the state intervenes with regulation into the payday loan market? A friend of mine wanted to open a payday loan business in New York City, but wasn't able to because of the regulation. So he had to open it in New Jersey. So those who wanted payday loans in New York are less able to get them than in New Jersey. But let's look at specifically what happens in the loanable funds market for payday loans. And this could also be pawn shops too, are regulated with interest rate regulations. So what happens when the state regulates payday loans, they put a price ceiling or price control in this case, or the price control in this case is a interest rate ceiling. So now the market is no longer determining supply and demand and the optimal emerged property, the state experts are determining this. And we know that when the state manipulates in the market, you end up with social crisis. So let's see what that social crisis is in this case. So here's our price control. So here's the demand for payday loans. And here's the supply of payday loans. You'll see that the demand is greater than supply. So what that means, you end up with a shortage of loanable funds. So those who need loanable funds the most in order to pay their bills over the weekend are unable to get those payday loans because of the state intervention. So those harmed by this intervention are those worse off in society. So then you ask yourself, this is a well-known result in economics. Why does the state continue to do this? Are they demagogues? By doing this, creating a shortage of loanable funds for those who need it most, that creates more dependence on the state. And so again, the state's role, motivation, intentions is to grow its power. So by not allowing those who need loanable funds the most, they then have to go underground to get the loan, or they can't get the loan and they lose their housing. And then they become more dependent on the state. So it could be an intended consequence, which would mean that the state intervention is done by demagogues, or it could be an unintended consequence where the state intervention is done by do-gooders. That's for you to decide. But nonetheless, the consequence, or unintended consequence, or intended consequences, those who need loanable funds the most aren't able to get them. Thank you. That completes our lecture module on loanable funds market and the regulation of payday loans.